Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sumer Sports Show live here at Radio Row at Circa in Las Vegas. So excited to be out here. Have had fun so far getting to talk to people about football, meeting some friends online, and really just kind of previewing the NFL season. I'm your host, Parker Fleming, here with my co-host and my friend and my colleague, Tej Seth. Tej, how are you today?
Great. Yeah, it's so much fun to be in Vegas. We did the show with Matthew Call yesterday, previewing the NFC North. Now we're doing the AFC South. I'm excited to talk about this division as well, Parker.
Yeah, and so we're out here this weekend as part of the kickoff contest weekend for Circa Sports, bringing some people out and doing a little bit of Radio Row, doing a football preview for their Million and Survivor contest. Tej, tell us a little bit about both of those contests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, anyone can sign up to these contests in Vegas. You can play from anywhere, but you do have to sign up in Vegas. Between the two contests, there's 14 million in guaranteed prizes and no rake. So, you can really see like the opportunity here. We were just talking to two of the guys that won the Circa Million contest last year, ended up walking home with over $1 million in winnings. Was really cool to talk to them. And so there's the Circa Million contest, 6 million in guaranteed prizes. You pay $1,000 per entry, and you can have a maximum of 5 entries per person. You just pick 5 teams against the spread every week. We're going to have some Sumer Sports game previews that hopefully can help with some projected points and different stuff like that. And you can just go through that. And then the Circa Survivor, which is all the game theory things that you'll like as an econ person. Parker, you're picking one team every week. If you go 20-0 throughout the whole season, if you pick the right winner of every game every season, you'll walk home with the prize or a share of the prize, depending on how many people do that. So super cool to sign up in Vegas here and then play from anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really interesting contests, and always, we like, putting your money where your mouth is and making predictions is always fun to see people do that, and talking to the winners. Might even get them on the podcast here a little bit because their story is pretty crazy about how they went through their methods and everything. But about that here at Circa, we're going through the divisions, just kind of talking some football. Tej and I wanted to hop on real quick and talk about the AFC South. Really excited for this division. As everyone knows, I'm the world's most casual Tennessee Titans fan, but I want to look at this from an analytical perspective, understand the strengths of teams. So Tej, here's what we got right now with our preview up on sumersports.com/the-zone. You can find this article. We've got our projections from Sumer here to win the division. Jacksonville, 48.5%, Tennessee, 19.1%, Indianapolis, 20.3%, Texans, Houston Texans, 14.8% there. So kind of a spread, strongly favoring Jacksonville, but maybe some uncertainty with those other 3 teams, and not a dominant, not a plurality, but not a majority of possibility for Jacksonville there. Tej, which number here stands out to you the most as we're looking at who's going to win the AFC South?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that we have Jacksonville at 48.5% to win the division. If you were to say Jacksonville or the field to most people, I feel like they would take Jacksonville at this point. You have Trevor Lawrence's ascension last season where he ranks top 5 in EPA per play the second half of the season. You have the 27-point comeback against the Chargers where we saw the advantage that Doug Peterson gives the Jaguars, going for it on 4th downs, being able to lead at one of the biggest comebacks in playoff history, using the T formation from the early 1900s on 4th and 1 to put them in field goal range with Travis Etienne, and you throw Calvin Ridley into that offense. I think it's hard not to be excited about what Jacksonville has to offer this year, but their offensive line is a little worrisome right now. There's a lot of movement along that front, and they're looking at not having one of the better offensive lines in the league. And I think Trevor Lawrence is good enough to avoid sacks. That was his main trait his rookie year that kept the Jaguars offense afloat and not the worst offense in the NFL with Urban Meyer. But it is worrisome that they're not going to be able to get into a lot of the run concepts I know Doug Peterson would want to get into because of that offensive line weakness.
Absolutely. And you look at their strength of schedule is 0.36, which is the best in the league in terms of ease. But if you look at how that breaks out, they do go Miami, Kansas City, at Buffalo, at New Orleans, at Pittsburgh, all before the bye. Not to mention they'll play 2 games against the Colts, both home and away, and they get a Texans divisional game in their preseason. Tej, what do you make of the idea of I probably want to play those teams with younger quarterbacks earlier in the season versus the issues that the Jaguars offensive line is going to have early on? Do you think that's going to go one way? Which way do you think that's going to go? In Jacksonville's favor, or is that trade-off going to be completely mitigated by the offensive line issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point to bring up because we usually see that the offensive line is strongest at the beginning of the season before injuries. If you look at the offensive line continuity during the season last year, the Chiefs and the Eagles were both top 4 in how many snaps they got out of their offensive line. That's such a crucial aspect of making it through the season. So it's always tough to predict injuries, but you can expect an offensive line injury or two. So I think Jacksonville early on in the season is going to be really good. And you have a full offseason now of Doug Peterson working with integrating Calvin Ridley into the offense. You get Evan Ingram one more year, and Christian Kirk and Zay Flowers can get bumped down a slot, which will be really helpful for them because of what Ridley has to offer. But yeah, playing the Colts in week 4, they should get the advantage there because Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen will probably still be figuring out the offense. When you get later in the season, I really think that Richardson could really start to come along from an accuracy standpoint, from a processing standpoint, and start to get some good quarterback play out of him as we progress later on.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Colts for a second there, because it's really interesting. They actually played a preseason game last night, so they're fresh on my mind. And one thing that I'm really worried about, so they're 20.3% for division title, 28.7% for playoffs. We're projecting 7.4 wins for them this season. So a lot of variation there. And again, the division's really tight, could go a lot of directions. One thing that I'm really worried about the Colts is not that their offense is not going to be good, but that the offensive line, which is pretty good for the Colts, is going to have such an issue blocking for Anthony Richardson, especially early on, because the way he plays the game is on a different axis than I think a lot of people are used to, because he's so dynamic and he can extend plays. Last night, perfect example, 3rd and 15, he scrambles for 16 yards, comes back on a holding penalty because he zigzagged across the field, and it's hard to change direction with blocking. I think there's going to be a pretty big adjustment pain. There's going to be big adjustment pains, even if Anthony Richardson is great, which I think he's going to be very exciting, and the offense is going to be high octane. It's really hard to block for a guy that's so dynamic in the backfield, honestly. And you have to learn how to do that.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that Shane Steichen, as play caller, as offensive designer, is going to design so much of their offense on RPOs and play action and read options, because that's what Richardson is really good at. And that's what's going to give the Colts an advantage throwing out those plays because of some of the personnel that they have. And we know that a problem with RPOs in the NFL is the offensive lineman can only go a certain portion down the field in their run blocking if the play ends up becoming a pass and getting called for a legal man downfield. That the rate at which that penalty is getting called is increasing every year in correlation with the rate of RPOs that are being called in the NFL. And I think that's going to be one of the issues that the Colts offensive line might have some trouble with. But I mean, when you look at Richardson last night, 9.6% pressure to sack ratio in college was the best in his draft class, 11th best in the entire country out of the 140 starting FBS quarterbacks. And even though the offensive line might have some struggles sometimes allowing pressure, I don't think he's going to turn those pressures into sacks. And I think that's one of the most important traits he's going to have as a quarterback early on in his Colts career, is making sure he's not getting sacked and extending these drives and not forcing them out of field goal range.
Yep. And as you and I have talked about on the podcast before, the value of that is not just saving the negative play. Like, creating a sack is one, he can create on top of that, but two, he's making the counterfactual of the play so much better, because it could be way worse if it's a sack. So that alone raises the floor. Absolutely. Speaking of raising floors, let's go to the basement and talk about Houston, the Texans, and where they were last year. We have them this year at 6.7 wins, 21% probability to make the playoff, 14.8% to win the division. Here's my question for you, because I was going to ask, if they win the division, what happened? But I think that probably means that Jacksonville got a lot of injuries. This is when Houston wins the division. My question is, last season they were bottom half in offense, bottom half in defense, right at the bottom of the worst offense by EPA per play, and kind of middle of the pack, but on the lower side of that for defense. What's more likely this season, that the Texans' offense is top half, or that their defense is top half?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I am going to go with the defense. I'm really excited about the Texans defense. Things that I've heard out of camp so far about Will Anderson sound amazing, and adding someone into that defensive line, I think, is going to be really special. But like, having D'Amico Ryans as your defensive play caller, I thought he was a top 3 defensive play caller last year, up there with the likes of Bill Belichick. And getting someone like him in there, he brought Jimmy Ward over from San Francisco to nail down that safety spot. Jalen Petrie is going to be really good for them in the other safety spot there as well. So I could really see the Texans defense finishing top half in EPA per play. But I am cautiously optimistic about the Texans offense. We know CJ Stroud is entering the league with arguably the highest floor of any quarterback from his draft class. He's going to show some accuracy early on. I thought he made a lot of accurate plus throws last year, even when accounting for Ohio State's receivers. And I think Dalton Schultz is going to be in for a big year. He's probably the most talented relative to position receiving option they have. Like, I think that Nico Collins is okay, and Robert Woods is starting to get to the end of his career, but he's still okay. And Tank Dell could be exciting, but he's undersized. So I think Dalton Schultz or CJ Stroud to Dalton Schultz is going to be really crucial for them this season.
Yeah, specifically with Schultz giving you just that option of, a tight end just frees up so much. Obviously, we've seen like tight ends and running backs are often substitutes, but I think in this case, in terms of where targets go and where rushing attempts go, but I think having that option, especially for a young quarterback, lets him have a reliable player. He can say, hey, we're going to get the ball to this guy. We're going to get a chunk yards. We're going to get those completions and kind of move forward. So I'm with you there. I think that's astute. All right, really quickly, we'll hit on the other team, the Titans, 7.5 wins, 26.2% playoff, 19.1% divisional title. I don't know if they're rebuilding. I know they have a plan. I haven't figured out what it is. In the draft, they didn't go wide receiver. They didn't really address what people thought their biggest needs were. They go in and make a big offseason signing. Going to try that again to get a counter to Treylon Burks with DeAndre Hopkins there and see if they can extend those games. I'm a little bit worried about the ability to kind of utilize those two guys, knowing that the rest of the offense is so volatile, is what I'd say. Not to mention especially with the suspensions, but even without the suspensions, that offensive line is going to be tenuous at best. What do you make of the Titans being the third most likely to win the division according to our projections?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about our projections is the Titans have a 19% to win the division, which is around the Colts, but the Titans have a 1.5% chance more than the Colts to have the number one pick. So they have a higher chance to end up in the top five. I think the Titans are a wide tail team, like you mentioned in a lot of the stuff that you were just saying, because we know DeAndre Hopkins is a target share monster. He did that in Arizona last year with Treylon Burks this year. It's going to be him and Burks and Okonkwo that get up a decent portion of the target share for the Titans. And Burks is still an unknown. He's obviously talented, but we haven't seen a ton from him. Okonkwo is someone, again, who was really good in a small sample size last year, led the entire league in yards per route run if you lower the amount of routes run necessary to look at that data set. But it's still so unknown on that offense. And Tannehill is, again, like someone who we've seen high-end play from before in a great offensive system when they had Arthur Smith there with really good weapons like A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks can be like 70% of Hopkins and Brown and Davis, and they can get some good offensive production. But I think the Titans defense, playing as hard as they do, having Jeffrey Simmons, who's one of the best defensive tackles in football, gives them a high enough floor, and then the offense is the unknown wide tail variable for them.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in too because Derrick Henry's on last year of his contract. We know Tannehill has one year, I think, as well. So are those possible? Halfway through, are they going to pack it in and say, "Hey, we're going to try to trade both of these guys. Let's give the reins to Willis and see what we have in him," or do we try to tank for a quarterback and kind of get some value out of those guys?
Or try Levis even too.
Try Levis, yeah. So I'm interested to see how they kind of break. The last question I want to ask you, Tage, is one we did a little bit yesterday with Matthew Collar and talked about. Which of these teams over the next 5 years are you highest on? So it's like, who's going to come out on top over the next 5 years of the AFC South? And I think the way I'll ask it with such a gap here is, why would it not be Jacksonville?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love this question. I'm glad that we're talking about it again for the AFC South. When I'm looking at a team that I would want to be a part of, or a team that I would want to root for or buy stock in for the next 5 years, I would go with Jacksonville. You already have your franchise quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. He's a guy, and I think that's so important. We talk about the dudes list all the time. Like, I think Trevor Lawrence is that dude. The numbers back it up. Everything that he did the second half of last year going into the playoffs was so impressive. And I think that this is something that has come up recently because of some of the restructuring the Browns have done with contracts. But the Khans are another group of owners that give Jacksonville an advantage because they pay out more cash than their cap takes up. The Browns do this, the Eagles do this, and the Jaguars are another one of those teams where they're going to restructure contracts to make sure that they have more talented players on the roster. They can pay out the cash and then they can push back the cap, making the cap space take up a less percent of the total cap, assuming the cap rises. And that's another reason why to really like the Jaguars is because we know the Cons are going to be committed to winning. But if I were to pick a second team,
hold on, I need to jump in there and say the Saints also do this to varying returns, just so we don't get flamed on Twitter. The Saints also do this a little bit as well.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, like the thing about the Saints is it was going so well for them until COVID hit. It's like the thing that can hold back these teams is if we have something like COVID or like a TV deal that falls through or something similar that decreases the cap or keeps the cap the same, right? Like, yeah, so that's the assumption that the Jaguars and the Eagles and the Browns and teams like that are banking on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think that's kind of we hit all the teams there and then talked about. I think Jacksonville is absolutely the next five. Really interested in what the Colts and Texans are doing. I feel excited about that. Again,
which future would you rather have between the Colts and Texans?
I'm slightly inclined to take the Colts. I just like Richardson, and I like what who they're bringing in Shane on offense and potentially what they can do there. The Texans might be a little more defense heavy. I mean, can you imagine a college team that had Jalen Petrie and Will Anderson on it, and then those dudes are both on the same team in the NFL? So slightly edge to the Colts. I think they're just more interesting, but it wouldn't surprise me to see the Houston's on the right path to moving forward this season and. I don't know. We'll be able to evaluate their draft moves from this last year. I think a little bit more in the future and see how that pans out. But excited about both of those teams. Think I would slightly lean the Colts there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely agree. And I think I mean it's tough with the Texans because they don't have their first round pick this year because they gave it for Will Anderson. Like I think Will Anderson, I mean, especially from his college production and what he's shown already, like could be a top 10, top 5 edge rusher in the NFL. The talent is there and he's going to be schemed up well because of Ryans, but like not having a possibly top 10 pick this year that could have been a Marvin Harrison Jr. or Brock Bowers or someone along those lines is going to be a little tough to swallow for the Texans while the Colts are in a different situation. I do want to talk about the Jonathan Taylor.
We have to, of course, obviously.
Before we wrap this up, it's hard to read it right now, but based on what you've seen, do you think Jonathan Taylor plays a snap for the Indianapolis Colts this season?
Yeah. So I don't want to like pretend I know more than I know in terms of the actual what's going on. But looking at the vibes and kind of thinking about the game theory here, it doesn't look like people are going to pay what the Colts are asking for Jonathan Taylor, even if Miami might be a fit, as what people were saying. I know that our own Sean Clement was tweeting about Jonathan Taylor's rush yards over expected have decreased, and that there's been some issues that might be related to scheme, but that also might be related to play, and it's really hard for a running back to be worth all of that. All of that issue, especially when you look at some of the names that have been so good in the draft or in the NFL and where they've been drafted. So I think that we're a little bit of a stalemate here. And I think the most likely outcome is Jonathan Taylor plays a restricted number of snaps with the Colts and spends the season trying to find someone to sign him this offseason. It is hard. I do empathize with the players there in that and saying like, well, I don't want to be completely marginalized and just used up like a resource, but it does reflect that, running backs are differently valued right now, and it's a little hard. But hopefully we see him on the field. Obviously want good players to play and have good seasons and everything. And selfishly, Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor in the backfield is extremely fun. That's just objectively funny for a football fan. So hopefully we see that situation get resolved. But I really think that it's really hard for me to see a trade happening just given the cost and the value right now.
I'm totally with you. I think it is in Jonathan Taylor's best interest to play for the Indianapolis Colts from a football perspective. I don't know exactly what's gone on behind the scenes with Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay, but from a football perspective, playing with Anthony Richardson, the gravity that he's going to bring to linebackers and giving Jonathan Taylor lighter boxes to run against. And then Shane Steichen schemed up the best run game that we've seen in the last 5 years in the NFL last year with the Eagles. Yep. And he gets a similar rushing ability in Richardson to do that with again. And like we saw Miles Sanders, who is an average running back by all advanced metrics, have a great season from a yards per carry standpoint and from an EPA per rush standpoint because of Jalen Hurts and because of Shane Steichen. So I would love to see Jonathan Taylor play for the Colts again this year. Evan Hull and Deion Jackson are just like they're still coming to form. They're still really, really young. if Taylor gets traded to Miami, it's going to be tough to compete with snaps there. You have Moser, you have Jeff Wilson, you have Devin A-Chain, who they just drafted. I think it's a lot better for Jonathan Taylor from a contract perspective to play for the Colts, but it's again, like you said, it's really tough to figure out exactly what's going on with the dynamics there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has just been a little snapshot. Again, we're here live at Circa doing Radio Row, talking about the AFC South. We'll be back later today with some more guests and some more talk about the NFL season coming up. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to Sooner Sports on Twitter, on YouTube. Share the show with your smart football friends. Share the show with your dumb football friends. Anybody who might enjoy it, help us grow that out there. Thanks for watching.